Owen.
I'm good, thanks. It's nice to be here.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for being here. You have such a history with two of the wildest stories out there, and I really want to let those be our two main subjects for the show. Let's start with the Montauk Project, one of several supposed secret government programs experimenting with time travel as well as other weird stuff. And this thread of info about time travel experiments, it really seems to start with the Philadelphia experiment, another conspiracy staple that has many different versions and speculations, but I know that you've looked into it and spoken about it quite a bit, so maybe we should start there. What would you consider the Philadelphia experiment? Was that one of the first known instances of such a project? And what happened there?
Whether or not it's the first, it's hard to say it's the first, but it's certainly one of the most spectacular. Like
Yeah.
if a patient had a stroke, did he have many strokes before that? Or many strokes, many strokes, but this was like a major gyration of the Earth, and it's very important that it occurred, according to the lore, in August of 1943, because there is a biorhythm which coincides with the so-called birthday of Isis, when the star Sirius is most direct. It was the high holy days of ancient Egypt, and this period of August is when the star system Sirius is right there closest to us, is a very sacred day in many different traditions. Now, this is when it occurred. So it's called a biorhythm that occurs every year, but there's a major biorhythm every 20 years. Now, this is a gyration of the Earth. So not an earthquake, but sort of like an earthquake in some respects. It's like the meridian, like the meridian system of the human body moves from one channel to the next. The heart feeds the liver, or the liver feeds the heart, etc. So you have this cycles of energy moving through the Earth, and this was a big one. So that's sort of an esoteric behind the scenes explanation of what was going on a purely energetic basis. When we translate energy into the human condition and the human drama, where every person is a player on the stage, we have government, different governments, the German government, having a hand in it, the American government, and the British would have been in there with all their secret departments, which are being directed. People don't, when they look at world politics, obviously people will look at Obama and the heads of state, and then if they think they're going to get a little bit deeper, they'll go to Bilderbergers and the Bohemian Grove and all sort of things. But as I began to investigate this, I had synchronicities with occult phenomena, and you had occultists, Aleister Crowley being one of them, who turned up, but he said something very interesting. There are, according to him, you have this MJ12 stuff that everybody's pretty much heard of. What that is really an offshoot of is what they call the secret chiefs. Those MJ12 people were, they're puppets just as much as they were players. They had important positions, but the secret chiefs, secret chiefs, they're called in occultism, and these are invisible characters. You're not going to get too much of a glimpse of.
Of course.
And yes, so this is what we're dealing on the world stage of the Philadelphia experiment, where you have experimentation with radar, experimentation with degaussing a ship so that it does not appear on radar screens, changing the electromagnetic field. And that's what the Philadelphia experiment was on the surface. And then, according to the lore of what happened, it disappeared. It disappeared and left this dimension. And the most important, I guess, evidence that they had was the damage that it did to the crew. And the crew was compromised mentally, physically, sometimes catching on fire, and what we know now as spontaneous combustion, or what's termed as that, sometimes having their body parts amalgamated into the bulkhead of the ship, and just suffering. Sometimes it was just mental trauma. These people were brought to about 3 naval hospitals, one of them, or military hospitals, one of which was in Camp Upton, Long Island, which was a convalescent hospital during World War I. And it was right adjacent to the old Nazi compound, compounding the complexity of the secret German involvement with the Philadelphia experiment, which is in a book called The Philadelphia Experiment Murder that I published. But so you have a confluence of different events on a bigger global scale, and then the conspiracy of the government files and what happens is all gets kind of shredded and all kind of disappears. But what you have is the acting out of, on a lower level, some bizarre play where everything's secret, but you do have experiments going on behind the scenes that are experimenting with human beings. This is in a time when we didn't have the abduction stories that are so prevalent today.
Right.
You had this would be the precursor to that, because any abductions that were going on back then, whether they were being done by organized crime or by military or secret government stuff, if they seem to be very reduced in number to the reports we get today. So the reports were fewer. It would seem that there was relatively little going on compared to today. So you have this going on, not so much in 43, but you have a study of these people who went into other dimensions and suffered greatly. And this becomes a great human factor study, which takes place after the war in combination with the data that they studied from Joseph Mengele, who did all sorts of horrible experiments on human beings, including little people, sometimes known as dwarves or midgets, doing experiments on twins, the psychic energy of twins, and all of this evolved into the human factor study at the old Camp Upton Convalescent Hospital, which turned into Brookhaven National Laboratory. It was the top security site in the East Coast, if not the nation. It was the headquarters of where atomic energy was being studied. It was owned by Associated Universities, which was a quasi-government group, not actually a government group. So it was a very interesting confluence of events, and out of this human factor study at Brookhaven begat the Montauk Project. But that early human factor study was engineered by John von Neumann, and he was the engineer of the Philadelphia experiment, who was also applying his studies of the human mind, of what you call electronics and computing to the human mind. He invented the first modern computer. And that was being used to study the human mind and get inputs and outputs on a computer.
Right on.
This type of experimentation has been verified. In fact, it's rather mundane. You'll even see certain aspects of it on the PBS sometimes, where you'll see flight simulation and even stealth craft pilots where they can actually move the ship by thinking. Biomanipulation. Manipulation. So this was the early parts of the studies, and as they went forward, they established a control of the human mind through electronics, and this scared the Congress, which outlawed it. You're not going to see this in the congressional record,
of course,
but it then went underground and ended up at Montauk Point, New York, in or about 1972, where it really started going. And Montauk Point, New York, had an old Air Force Station, Camp Hero, it's called. Its military history goes back to World War I as Camp Wyckoff, but Camp Hero has had a lot of strange things associated with it forever and a day. It's a strange place, and it's not necessarily a safe place, but it's now a state park where you can go out and visit it. You couldn't when we began investigating it. We turned the apple cart upside down here when we actually had a trial in the town of East Hampton. It was not me, but Preston Nichols, Duncan Cameron, and another man, Mark, who got involved in a trial because they were ticketed on this ground, and they'd chase you off virulently. In other words, vehemently, even violently, they would chase you off of that ground. Why? It was a state park, but they were using it for something. So there was a trial, which Preston Nichols was serving as his own defense attorney, and he actually won. It was pretty funny.
Really?
I have a transcript of the trial somewhere. Yes, because the judge actually said to the radar operator, or that he was a radar operator, actually he was park police. You know, he said, why can't these people go? This is a state park. You're supposed to have 1/3 of it dedicated, at least 2/3 of it dedicated to the people. They had confiscated much more. Why can't people go on there? He says, I walk my dog there. So the judge actually ruled justly, which is sometimes novel in our culture, but he ruled justly. And it caused a precedent where Bernadette Castro, who was at that time the Parks Commissioner, actually purchased a copy of one of the videos that Preston Nichols sold through Sky Books. And I actually sent her a tape. I sent her a tape which showed all this chicanery going on. And she got Superfund money to allegedly clean up the camp. I'm not saying there was nothing wrong with what she did, but they had this very strange company, the Parsons Corporation, come out from their headquarters were in Pasadena. They came out and did a whole cleanup study of munitions and whatnot with the Army Corps of Engineers, and that was a whole fiasco. They tried to hide a public meeting, which I was able to attend, and this Army guy was lying his pants off. But anyway, it was, so anybody can go out there now.
Right on.
So this is, but of course, they were doing experiments with the mind. Eventually, they were manifesting objects, according to the stories, manifesting objects. Because if you can affect thoughts, like there are reports of them changing the mood of people, animals. Mm-hmm. We've got some video that shows strange animal behavior out there. I even saw an abducted deer, or not an abducted, what do they call it, mutilated deer out there, which was a classic mutilation of a deer that looked like it had been dumped from outer space. Or not, I shouldn't say outer space, I should say, from 100 yards, a mile up, it just went splat on the ground. They were doing strange things with, parts taken out of it.
I've heard some really bold claims. I mean, when our government has so much secrecy, it really does leave the door open for some of these things that could be possible. What happened with the Montauk chair? Because that's kind of what this conspiracy kind of surrounds, is this Montauk chair. Did it come from a crashed UFO?
No, the Montauk chair is the information we have about it is somewhat abstract, particularly the procuring of it. Like I knew the man who claimed to have procured it, and how he came into my life was very bizarre. But there's tangential ties to that he worked. He used to operate a portfolio. His name was George Dixon. He's passed away last summer. I wouldn't even mention it. And he never wanted this broadcast publicly, but I met him. And when Duncan and Preston heard the story about that I told them about it, they were shocked. Not because they hadn't heard of it, but that he'd ever told anybody. It was always very secret. It was just between the three of them. And he told me because I was putting the book together, and he wanted me to know it. And he had strange financial connections, and he was a very unusual guy. And so there was a lot of strange tentacles of people that I met behind the scenes, but the Montauk chair was basically a lounge chair that had crystal radio receivers put around it so that it could pick up the thoughts of a psychic and be amplified out the gain horn of the transmitter tower out there. Preston Nichols can give you a much better technical description of it than I can because he's expert in this stuff. But basically, it's an amplifier. You know how if somebody's playing a guitar, an electric guitar, and they put an amplifier and it amplifies the sound. Well, the sound is basically radio waves. So you're doing the same thing with the mental waves, and you're amplifying what's going out in the mind, which includes emotions and includes modes. There was a man, George used to give me this paper on Martin Cannon, who did a whole lot of research on being able to change the moods of people. It was all sort of documented studies by Martin Cannon. And this stuff is kind of pedestrian nowadays. At the time it was coming up in the 90s when this was printed, it was very controversial.
Right.
Mind control has been it's not featured too often on TV, but it's mentioned now and then. They've had shows on it, and it's certainly a staple of conspiracy lore and a staple of history. There's even been, what was it, the CIA made a settlement with people at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal who had claims of mind control being used against them by Duncan Ewan Cameron, who was connected to Duncan Cameron of the Montauk Project. But this guy was evil personified with what he did. The CIA did not admit any wrongdoings in the payouts. It was all done in Canada, where the CIA was not supposedly involved because it's Canadian. So you get out of it by going to Canada and doing it. But this stuff is pedestrian now. The mind control stuff that happened and surrounded the Montauk Project doesn't really have to be established as a. We don't have to argue about the fact that mind control is a whole subsubject of this now. Where it becomes very interesting is the components of time travel, the technology of time travel, and how mind control surrounds that. Because we live in a society where we are limited. We are limited in the way we think, the way we act. We don't eat proper food. There is not an adequate demand for proper food, although there is a demand that's increasing. But even that response is, you go into New York City, where I'll be in a couple of days, and you see they call it organic food. They don't know what they're talking about in New York City. Some places might, but by and large, no. People want to eat organic, so they'll have juices, and they don't really understand. In Long Island, it's better, but it's still, there's a long way to go as far as teaching people how to eat properly, so that their brains will think properly and they will function properly. And this is a whole story that one can go into the holistic quality of a human being, and there are a lot of lacks in the society we live in. So
True.
So when you talk about the subject of time, well, time is a perception, and how do people perceive? They perceive with their brain, and it's a filter, and the brain is not even fully activated. It's partially activated. So this gets really down to more of the conspiracy is the human construct, as opposed to shape-shifting reptilians, Bilderbergers, international bankers, and this sort of thing. And they don't help the problem, but the real conspiracy, and this is what I started off into as a young person, was the conspiracy of your own circumstance, of your own awareness. This is the key focal point, because conspiracy focuses too much on, look what they're doing, look at the power of the dollar bill and the eye in the triangle in the dollar bill, and this stuff that is really silly and has been over marketed on.
That's the prison.
On the History Channel, exactly. And that whole concept of the eye in the triangle that they show on the dollar bill, that is the symbol of the Illuminati, that is the symbol of the illuminated being within yourself that you want, that the mystery schools used to teach, that gets convoluted and degraded over the centuries. So that eye in the triangle is what you want to wake up in yourself. And as you do wake up, you will see the conspiracy that's going around you, just in terms of the way people eat, conduct themselves in business, and this sort of thing. So this is what, rather than focusing on all these nefarious acts that these people do and how they make this Batman shooting and what's that thing, the Sandy Hook shooting, and how it's all tied together, and people are studying how it's all tied together. Yes, it's all tied together. And when you're studying how it's all tied together, you're kind of missing what's going on inside of you.
Yeah, you're still kind of within the framework,
you're
the
in
matrix.
The yeah, you're in the squirrel cage, and yes, it's all connected. It was always connected. You're just becoming aware of it. It's better to become aware of what's going on with you, and you could be improving yourself as opposed to unveiling this conspiracy, which has been, I said, when they start unveiling it on the History Channel or the Jesse Ventura show or whatever, this is like the shoemaker or the shoe shine boy telling you to buy stocks. It's time to get into the stock market. It's time to get out of conspiracy, because it's really, we've got everybody doing it, and I mean, sure,
It's getting saturated. A lot of areas are getting saturated.
Conspiracy shows because, it helps me sell my books. Okay, that's how I make my living. But on the other hand, it's also important to, speak the truth and say what is what about what, and this is sort of the situation. And there's a lot of people that, need to be more aware of what goes on, that still believe in the goodness of, what our government supposedly stands for as opposed to what it really stands for. So there's a lot of, people are waking up on different levels. So
right.
But this is, the current level in my estimation is to, shed the conspiracy shackles and start working on yourself.
That's, I've had a lot of guests recently that have kind of put that out there, and we try to cover a lot more of the positive side than a lot of other shows. I know Alex Jones, one of the most popular shows out there, it's always just identifying little pieces within the framework, and it doesn't really ever get you out of it. There's not very much enlightening talk there. So yeah, I agree with you. It is important to identify it and to know what happened, but also, you gotta realize, you're not gonna fight this battle in the three-dimensional world. It's a mental thing, and if you can free your mind, that's about as good as you can do.
I can't speak for Alex Jones. I've certainly heard of him. I've seen a few YouTubes. I've never listened to his show, but then I've never listened to the Art Bell show. Maybe I heard the David Anderson broadcast. I looked those on YouTube, but I've never listened to any of these shows, George Norrie.
Really?
No, never listened to them because they're not a valid source of information for what I would be interested in. But
well, let's talk about that. What are you interested in? What message would you put out that you don't think people are hearing enough?
Say something about the it's not even about Alex Jones. Somebody did a diatribe on where his funding comes from.
Right.
But not in relation to Alex Jones, but it's the somebody also did a study of the ratings of these big conservative talk show hosts like Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and some others. I think it was that guy, that Mormon guy. He was really noisy on TV. He was a short guy with the blonde hair.
Glenn Beck.
Yeah, Glenn Beck. And somebody did a study and said that their ratings were completely bogus and false. In other words, people were not listening to their shows. And that whatever the company, I forget the name, which was the biggest broadcasting company, was paying them huge salaries, but it was all false ratings because they broadcast that out there and people think that this is what people are thinking or thinking that they're agreeing. Now, sure, there are some people agreeing with it and buying into it, but it's all sort of a scam in itself because the ratings aren't there, but they paid these guys huge money so they can play the part. But it's actually a controlling of the airwaves because nobody really wants to hear this bogus conservatism, which isn't really conservative at all. And so this is like what goes on in media. And does it go on in the alternative media? Yes, it's even probably more sinister there because people are being more fooled. And most of your top line speakers have affiliations with secret societies.
Yes, that's true.
And it's like they just don't understand. So you're saying, what am I interested in? It's generally not what other people are interested in. I was interested in time at a time when physicists weren't interested in time. They were interested in holding their status quo with a few tiny exceptions. So now all the physicists are getting interested in time, and it's become vogue to talk about the possibility of time travel, although most of them are really in the dark ages. Not all of them, but most of them. So this is like, what am I interested in? What human beings are interested in. I mean, you look at what they watch on TV and whatnot. It's kind of like peeling back the veil. Right now, my main interest is in the Romanian adventure that I'm involved in, as well as Qigong, Taoist Qigong, which I practice every day, which is all about energy.
Well, you started off kind of by mentioning that biorhythm that took place right around the time of the Philadelphia experiment. I wondered if maybe that had anything to do with creating a different effect when they're manipulating magnetic fields. I mean, you hear about ley lines, you hear about certain energy nodes on the planet. Energy is the one area that it starts to get a little new agey. I haven't felt any real effects of energy in my life. I've gone to Reiki before and had no effect. I'm interested in it. How could someone who's a bit of a skeptic actually feel a noticeable energy change? Is there a way just to verify?
Yes, I can tell you right now.
Nice.
I can tell you if you were to take your hand and you were to press at the bottom of each finger, you know, where the finger meets the part of the hand.
Uh-huh.
You press each one of those bottom points of the finger, and on each hand, you press them and you rub them around for a bit. And then you rub the center of the palm. And then if you've done that, tell me when you've done that on both hands.
Oh, I'm doing it.
Okay, now you take your fingernails and you rub the fingernails together like you were, like they were sandpaper. You know, like you were rubbing sandpaper against. You were like selling your nails, each one. You're rubbing all your fingernails together in the thumbs. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm doing it.
And the audience can do this, and you do this for a while. Now, when you do this and you keep doing it, I'm going to have you open up your hands, and you're going to feel an imaginary ball, which will be about the size of a Nerf ball. If you just open it up now, open up the hand. You feel the energy between your hands?
I do. I definitely do feel like a little tingle there, yeah.
Yeah, you'll feel an energy. That's a chi ball. Chi is life force energy. Now, you can take this and you just feel that energy. You can send that to any part of your body. I once did this for an audience in Germany, and the woman had a hip pain, her whole for a, what do you call it, a acute hip pain, and she did this exercise. I said send it to her body, and she was so happy. She was healed. She came up and gave me all these massage tools that she used in her profession. These,
wow.
About $60 worth of massage tools as a gift for me, because she was so, I said, wow, this handled a long duration affliction that she'd had. Now, where I could show you more proof, and I wouldn't brag about my own abilities simply because I haven't tried it, but there is something called a Kangen water system that can cost up to $10,000 that increases the pH of the water. And of course, pH is very good for to have high pH in your water, because it will alkalize your body, and diseases only happen when your body.
I've heard that there's a cancer cure that revolves around that.
Oh yeah, totally. So anyway, there was a big martial arts, seminar going down in North Carolina, and my teacher was down there, and this guy who was leading the seminar had a Kangen water system and was showing how the pH could balance. My teacher went over there using this type of energy, there's much more. That's just like an initial introduction to a chi ball. But he goes over there, puts his hands around the water, and it had a higher pH than the Kangen water system. That's physical chi energy from a qigong grandmaster.
Yeah, I've seen some monks do some crazy things. Bruce Lee was all about the chi energy, and he had powers that seemed to transcend, what's normal. His strength seemed to be ridiculously powerful, and I've seen plenty of examples of it. It just seems like it takes so much time and years of dedication to.
Well, let me put it this way. I've been studying it for 6 years, and according to what my teacher told me, because a lot of guys, if you listen to Chuck Norris talking about the death of Bruce Lee, he doesn't know what he's talking about, because he's not really. He'll talk about the medical reasons Bruce died, and he's not really genned in on this sort of martial arts. He's in this sort of kick-ass karate.
Yeah,
learned in Korea, and
there's a lot of mystery surrounding Bruce Lee's death. A lot of conspiracies.
I'm just telling you what my teacher told me.
Sure.
Basically, Bruce Lee was a great athlete, great martial artist, but he was at odds with the Chinese. They didn't want him to teach this. Of course, I heard this story, but he was also very cocky and disrespectful at times. He preached the Tao, and it was very close to his heart. And he was disrespectful. And from the story I heard, which is like inside martial arts, he disrespected one of these masters. And when I say disrespected him, probably tweaked him physically. I don't know what happened. But one of his students was was not very happy and hit Bruce Lee in the back of the head and actually hit him. Now, this hit was not something that, paralyzed Bruce Lee. It was a chi blow. Chi can be used to kill. It can be used, it's all about intent. Mm-hmm. And this was a reaction. I don't know exactly what happened, but that chi knocking into Bruce Lee's head is what precipitated the whole medical situation. In other words, he was dead from chi. And
wow.
His chi, you don't die like that if your chi is working. It's even with the synchronicity of the moment. He bit off more than he could chew.
Gotcha.
He's also got a curse against him, his family, supposedly. But anyway, this chi blow, he was told what to do and to come back and get it healed, and he did not come. He did not pay attention. He did not, so as great as he was, as brilliant as he was, we all have our weak points.
He was prideful.
Yeah, prideful. And he was good. He would not teach pride, but I mean, the guy was good. When you're that good, it's not hard. It's right. Especially if you're a showman and an actor.
Yeah, you're among the masses who have no clue.
You're basically showing off.
That's true.
And he was a great, he was basically a great human being from everything I've heard about him. But as they say, when you get into some of these loftier areas of what you're doing, that's the story I know. I wasn't there. But when I do see his wife talking about it or this or that or the other thing, there's some blank spots there that certain things they don't understand because they don't even talk in terms of chi energy or really understanding what it is. It's very powerful. And of course, in the hands of a master, it's life-giving. And that's really the point of it, is to teach people life. But it's so outside of the box of the way people think that I saw a jiu-jitsu master last night kind of really having some ontological shock about being shown certain things that just seemed so stupid to him. But not that he was saying they were stupid, but it's like, he knows these moves that are like conventional karate type moves, and they just aren't going to work against certain principles of nature. So it's like, and there was even a story that's true of one guy getting thrown by a woman in our class, and he checked into Bellevue. He had ontological shock. He thought he went in the rubber room. He couldn't deal with it because some woman could outmaneuver him, and he was like a nth degree black belt or whatever.
Damn.
So that this is like, it's energy, and it's people have fixed ideas. So if you have people that are like well schooled in whether it's karate or something more mundane like university education, they're very entrained to think in a certain way. All Chinese martial arts is trained in the wrong. I'm telling you, it's trained in the wrong way because I was taught by somebody who teaches it the right way. Mm-hmm. And he can demonstrate why they do it the wrong way.
I also sometimes wonder about just the placebo effect in general, in that if people have doubts, if they've been taught that there's nothing to energy, they aren't going to feel those effects because their mind is telling them there's nothing there. Kind of like the same goes with crystals. Some people put a lot of faith in crystals and their properties, and maybe it's maybe they're manifesting that because they have such faith in it. Sometimes I wonder about that.
With crystals, what you have to understand with crystals is that's how radios work. Radios
that's true.
Crystals. So it's kind of like they are what you need a crystal to make a radio receive. So if you put it into the scientific reference frame, then you have. Now, I had a friend, I don't know what happened to him, Mark Roberts, he's mentioned in my book, Montauk Book of the Living. He was a dowser, a very interesting man, but he was doing a workshop here in New York, and he took these two crystals that were flat. They had flat, I think they'd been, shaved. Mm-hmm. Shaved, what's the word? Cut, I can't even remember. Cut, what's the word? Sawed. And they were flat bottoms, and he rubbed them together in a dark room, and we saw them light up.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was a piezoelectric effect, but he says, I want you to see that this energy with crystals is not BS, he says. So he showed it, and he wanted to demonstrate it. And it would light up. They were quartz crystals.
Crystals are definitely interesting, but people attribute some wild properties to them, and I'm not so sure how far it goes. The spectrum is very wide with crystals.
Yeah, it is. Well,
in terms of the claims.
Yes, but people that are have sensitives. They have different brain entrainment. I don't mean that they're exaggerating, but they're sensitive. So there is applications to them, but that's a whole nother subject. Crystals. But anyway.
Well, I do want to jump over to your other claim to fame, man, the other great chunk of conspiracy goodness. I mean, that's the stuff that's going on in Romania, the story of the Hall of Records. As I understand it, because of your work in describing the Montauk Project and time travel, you were approached by this David Anderson guy who was impressed enough to bring you to Romania, where you met this Radu Cinamar guy, and he told you about the secret chamber. Are those kind of the cliff notes? You want to tell people a little bit more of that story?
It's not exactly accurate because, well, David is a very interesting character who I've known for some 14 years now, and he is a time control scientist who was very impressed with the Montauk Project. In fact, he made a point of it, and when he read my last newsletter, I do have a newsletter, the Montauk Pulse, which is published once every quarter. You can get it from Skybooks. At skybooks.usa.com, you can sign up for the newsletter. It's quarterly. It's about $20 a year. There's 4 issues. And I do updates on this stuff. The next one will be on my adventures to Romania, which we'll probably be touching on here in a few minutes. But David is a time control scientist, and he gave an incredible lecture on Coast to Coast, not lecture, a discussion on Coast to Coast about the capabilities of what he's up to now. Of course, I've kind of followed him with this for 14 years, and he can slow things down in time, speed them up in time. I saw a video at this at Montauk with about 20 other people. We witnessed a video of this. He's not been able to.
Really?
Yeah, he's not been able to release that or a similar video due to what he calls bureaucratic issues, red tape he called it.
Oh, man.
He's hoping to do, in fact, I thought he would have done it by now from what he said, but release courses in time, online courses on time, studying time. Now, I don't have any idea what these courses are going to be, but he's supposed to be doing courses, online courses for people interested in time on, I guess it would be on his website at the Anderson Institute. But he was interested in time. He was helping to fund a camp called Atlanticron in Romania that would meet every summer, and it was artists, writers, and scientists who would meet their minds, and some really incredible things come out of there. But it's basically a camp for youth, Romanian youth, 16 to 30. They have science fiction discussions there. They have art workshops. They have scientific discussions. There's a man who brought neurology to Romania, the science of neurology. I see him every year. I'm friends with him and his wife. The Complexity Studies Center, Florin Montanu, who's like one of the most incredible professors in Romania. These people have become my friends, but and many of them have met David. I got to meet the Dimitri, the cosmonaut. He's the only Romanian ever to go in space. Romania's cosmonaut to go in space. So he's now a friend of mine. And there's incredible people there. He recently just started showing up at Atlanticron. So you have an incredible amount of some of the best minds in the world flow through that camp. And of course, they're teaching young people. I teach Qigong there, and I lecture on sort of the stuff with more of a tilt towards sacred Romania, but I lecture on all these type of things. And David Anderson brought me there. He was there the first 2 summers, and although he keeps tabs on me while I'm there, he has not been present for the last 4 summers at Romania, but he emails me now and then while I'm there. Even in real life he does, but he's not. We're waiting for something to come from his quarter. The next thing I expect to hear is these online courses. But he's a real time control scientist. And when he did the interview with Art Bell, he did say, Art asked him if they were putting people in the chamber, and he says yes. And he said it was very close to before sending people back in time, so to speak. Now, wow. He also will tell you in the same paragraph that what you're told is, the government or the secret sector is 15, 20 years ahead of you. Preston Nichols would say 30 years ahead of you. What you don't hear. Like the the little tiny computers that we have today.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a guy connected with Bell Labs telling me that they had those in the 1980s. He was telling me, he says, yeah, it's all in a little box. So these discoveries are made way ahead of time, and then they're filtered out into the military-industrial complex. Mm-hmm. Who's going to sell them? Is it going to be, Sony? Is it going to be Samsung? Is it going to be,
right,
whatever company? So these are, the way the world really is, as opposed to the way it appears to be. But so David Anderson brought me to Romania, and he didn't. I did not meet Radu Cinamar in person. I have had a correspondence with him. He approached a publisher who published the Montauk Project, my publisher in Romania, who published it in the Romanian language. He approached him and says, "Would you like to do my book?" He did, and that is how that book got published in Romania. And then I
translated it.
I had the books translated into English and published in the English language. Transylvania Sunrise, Transylvania Moonrise, Mystery of Egypt, and the new one, Secret Parchment. So those books, the whole series, everything that he's written is now in the English language. And it's a story that I also add to, because each year I've gone to Romania and I add my 2 cents about, the veracity of his claims to the degree that I can back them up.
Yeah, let's talk about the content of those claims. Pretty fascinating stuff.
Well, the claims are that in the mountains of Bucegi, it's spelled Bucegi, we'd say Bucegi, but they say Bucegi, and that's in sort of on the border. Transylvania is a big plateau with the Carpathian Mountains, and that go around it. And on where the mountains meet, going north and south and east and west, approximately in that area, is less than 50 miles as the crow flies, is where, Count Dracula had
the castle?
His fortress. He did not have a castle. And the castle they have there is bogus. It's not his castle. It's just a tourist place with negative energy. Don't go there. It's not. He had a fortress in the mountains. You can go there, but it's a hard road. It's more obscure. But he had a fortress, and that was from people going in, crossing the mountains into Transylvania. Southern part of Romania is Wallachia, with a W, spelled with a W, Wallachia. He was the Prince of Wallachia. He was not the Prince of Transylvania. He did not come from Transylvania. He was born there when his father was incarcerated by the Hungarians. But there was a passage there that goes in and out. Now, about 50 miles as the crow flies, it takes longer than that by car, is a Sphinx, the Romanian Sphinx, which there's another megalith nearby. They're called Babele, which means old women. They're both sacred stone structures. The Sphinx looks like it's profile. The left side of the face is the face of a man. On the right side, you'll see it's faded away, eroded, but it looks like a griffin or a lion. Mm-hmm. It's much more eroded than the left side, and you have to get a specific view on it to see it. But it's the biggest tourist attraction in Romania for the Romanians themselves. And it's beautiful up there. You're above the tree line, and there's also, some of my friends took a walk there. I took a hike. I went back to the hotel. I've been having 6 hours of sleep for weeks. So I went back to the hotel to rest, and a small contingent of our group went on a hike away from the Sphinx, and they ended up in an area where their hair began to stand on end.
Weird.
Their hair began to stand on end, and you call it static electricity. It's supposed to be just before lightning hits. I don't know if any lightning hit, but they had quite a time of it. There's a lot of energetic anomalies up there, and it's very beautiful. But this Sphinx, and to get to the story of what you asked me, is maybe it's 300 yards underneath there is, according to the story, which was found with ground-penetrating radar from a satellite, was a chamber. And this chamber, they couldn't get at it. So they approached the head of Department Zero, which was the most secretive arm of Romanian intelligence, a man named Caesar Brad. And the whole story is about how he grew up under the psychic supervision of a Chinese doctor who set up the paranormal department of Romania, Department Zero. He was from Red China, and he tutored basically Caesar Brad to get into this position so that he would actually help this the Americans access this secret chamber, because the Americans discovered it. And there's negative force that sets it up as Italian Freemasonry, who tries to get at it. This character, Signor Mazzini, who tries to get at it, and he's portrayed as personified evil, and he's not successful in getting at the control of this chamber. The chamber is controlled by the Americans and the Romanians in a joint activity. Now, what's in this chamber is very sci-fi. There's tables in there, which if you put your hand over a part of the table, it'll read out your DNA in molecular form. If you put it closer, it's in atomic form. And if you put your hand on another part of a table, it will show an alien DNA. And it will show it in microscopic or atomic form. It will also show the star system it came from. And this is all holography. So you'll see the star system, you'll see the planet, and it'll tell you that it came from there. Apparently not, I don't know if it's in the Romanian language or the English language. I don't think language is involved. I think it's graphically portrayed. Mm-hmm. And if you put them over at the same time, it'll read out a hybridization of those two species. Now, this is
mind-blowing stuff.
It's mind-blowing, but it takes the myth of Noah's Ark, and it says, well, what's really going on? Noah's Ark is a watered-down story of something like this. And this is supposed to be 50,000 years old. To the best of their best educated guess, this place is 50,000 years old.
Man, I would suggest, I would think it would be much older. That's kind of crazy.
Well, that's their educated guess. They don't really know.
Yeah, who is there any indication of who built that or how it came to be there?
That's a very sensitive subject when they get in and they get into the story and they try and find out who built it. With basically, because there's also a time history of the world in holographic form there. I think there's a time device in there. They haven't really described it, but they do go, there's 3 tunnels in there, one of which goes to Egypt. And underneath the Giza Plateau, they find a device which enables you to travel in time with your consciousness, not with your physical body. And when they get to that subject of who invented this stuff, it gets very touchy. It's like a book or a movie they've done in sci-fi called Riverworld. When you get to the masters of the world, they become shadowy, and they don't want you to know any more than the guy who's running the haunted house that you're in, when you're a kid, wants you to know what the tricks are. He's playing games. You're not getting to see behind the scenes. There's an orchestration going on there that was hard to penetrate with regard to who built it.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the content of this chamber. I mean, it's for people who haven't heard it, that the idea that there's a piece of equipment there that will holographically show you DNA of yourself, hybrids with other species. I mean, that's pretty fascinating stuff. Is there any other details about that you can give us? Was there anything extrapolated from seeing non-human DNA?
I have to tell you that that book, which the incident happens in 2003, that book was written from a point about 6 weeks after the opening of the chamber. So that's about all the information we're offered is about 6 weeks of intense investigation, which was relayed, what the author was allowed to relay into the book because he has a censor. And so he didn't tell us too much. Most of the book is about the political infighting and manipulation into the background of Caesar Brad, who's the one who opens up the chamber. He allows Radu Cinamar to come in. He hand selects him to write this story. And people in Romania will sometimes have very heated opinions of whether this chamber exists in this reality or in another reality. But their opinions are always too heated for my liking. In other words, they may be right or they may be wrong, but I don't think their opinions should be so heated. I don't have a heated opinion about it. Mm-hmm. There is the second book, Transylvania Sunrise, gives a lot of corroborative information in terms of newspaper articles and people that wrote into the editor corroborating what had happened. We don't know exactly, but the exact DNA applications, I'm kind of zeroing in. This happened at Atlanticron this summer, and I want to get more information. I believe some of the most important things that might be gleaned from that chamber, if I don't think they've done it, is the 24th gene pair, the so-called 24th gene pair, which human beings have 23 gene pairs.
Right.
According to sound biological theory, there was once 24, and it's my hypothesis that when they fused, that it lessened the ability of mankind. And if we want to take it one step further, the ability to change morphogenesis, in other words, change, shapeshift. Now, there was a doctor, actually, he invited me to come out at this campfire at 2:00 in the morning. It's a very momentous, just this summer, and so they just invited me to come out, and because I was there, they were going to speak in English. Normally they'd speak in Romanian, and it was dark. There was no campfire. They said, we couldn't get the wood. So we're like out there, and they say, well, we're going to talk about the ascension of the human being, transcendence of the human being. And so I said, well, I started telling them about book 2, the Transylvanian Sunrise, which goes into the longevity of living for hundreds or thousands of years. And out of that, this doctor, he's a medical doctor, he teaches medical doctors, he came to my Qigong class, he took a very strong interest in this 24th gene pair. And then, because he understood the science of it. And then we found this young girl who was studying biology. She's studying biology, she's just like, I think she's just starting college. And I started telling her about the tree of life and DNA, and she got interested, and then she kind of had this real scientific sort of solution that impressed the doctor. So we're going to try and I'm not going to go into the biology of it now because I want him to explain it to me in concise language so I don't have to go in, and he'll understand it more clearly. And it's basically, there is a scientific plausibility between what we're saying here. To go into the deeper science of it, and I said, once we do this, we got to be careful that, maybe that we're announcing a discovery because somebody else might have discovered it. It's like these things happen simultaneously as consciousness moves forward. But the point I was saying about this is very DNA driven, and it's the morphogenesis of life. It's changing. So life is changing. We see life. We don't have the same diseases we had in the 50s. That's not all because of vaccinations. It's just life changes. Diseases change. Life is constantly changing. So what could come out of this DNA? If I was going into that DNA bank and had access to it, I'd start asking these questions. And I'd certainly like to have somebody who's more versed in biological terms than I am to be with me to, like this doctor, to everything, who gets it. It's like people, a lot of their scientists don't have the prejudice that many of our scientists are still suffer from. So what they've done with it, to answer your original question, I don't know. A part of me thinks that some of the best part has gone into neglect, but I don't know that.
Oh, that'd be a shame.
I don't know that.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, you see, or it's been sequestrated and only in secret sectors. This is the infinite potential of life itself and the human mind. Mm-hmm. So even the idea of this concept is something that we look forward to. Just as when they did the rocket to the moon, that was a dream when I was a kid. In the 1950s, growing up, in 1969, we had a man on the moon. The problem with the moon and the space program, it's all under censorship, and what goes on out there, they don't tell us everything. So right. it's all again, it's censorship, which David Anderson has said is the key component in modern warfare.
It is
censorship. Yes,
it is. That's kind of why you hear all kinds of stories. The deeper you get into conspiracy, you just hear wild stories, and you have to say, well, number one, I know the government lies to me. I know the government shrouds everything in secrecy. They have nefarious deeds. They have nefarious motivations. That opens the door to all kinds of wild stories, and some are true, some aren't. And it's impossible to really know because no one's going to tell you the truth. The government is not going to give you any information on it.
And so this becomes the hallmark of the individual is that he has to go in and find his own answers. If you go looking to the government for answers, it's like going to it's like going to a teacher for an answer about something where they've just been taught to teach you pedestrian information.
Exactly.
They're there to control and handle the population, not necessarily to benefit the individual on these levels. So you have to go in and you have to learn how to ask yourself questions and get your own answers, as opposed even by getting the answers from books. Books will help you, and you can decide whether you like the information or not. It's that you just can't take answers from a book without inspecting it yourself.
Of course. And something else I did want to ask you about is, you had mentioned briefly that another part of that chamber is an area that gives you the content of the history of the world. And I've heard you describe before that it comes from an individual's perspective. But, is there any more details about that you can give the people? Because that's pretty interesting, too.
It's bioresonant. In other words, all the devices that are described in these books are bioresonant. So if you sit in the chair to see the history of the world, it'll be different than what I see. It'll be different than what the girl down the street sees. It'll be different than our parents would see if they were there. Everybody has a different perspective. So it's bioresonant. Now, this is very much akin to a hallucinogenic principle. Whereas if you take a hallucinogenic, it's going to be a different experience than I have. If we're both geared towards history, and we're both in separate chairs like that Clockwork Orange that comes out of these type of experiments, with the experiments that were Clockwork Orange, the movie was based upon, the book, you're going to get, and we're steered towards certain areas, we're going to have certain areas of commonality, we're going to have certain areas of difference. So what hallucinogenics, such as LSD, which was used extensively in the early mind control experiments, is a mind amplifier. It amplifies the mind. It exaggerates things. It builds it up. It's the same thing they were doing at Montauk, where they had highly sophisticated mind amplifiers. There are two different ways there are two different means to an end, which is to amplify the consciousness. Now, I do not advocate psychotronic amplification of the mind. I don't advocate hallucinogenic drugs. All of these things can be done internally. They can be done internally, and you want to develop them on your own horsepower. So lucid dreaming is a good practice to indulge in if one wants to expand their mind.
Do you have any tips for that? I've had people try to give them before, but lucid dreaming is one thing that I've had it happen at random 1 or 2 times. How can you channel that? How can you induce that?
There are different ways. One way is to look at the details in the environment, like look at 30 details a day. Like I'm looking over a hole in my wall where there used to be a
nail or something.
Nail, yeah, and looking at where a nail is sticking out in the wall. And you look at 30 details in the environment per day. And the next thing you know, you'll be in your dream looking at a detail. And you say, oh, God, I'm looking at detail. Oh, I'm doing the drill. Oh, I'm awake. And once you become awake, that's one way to become awake. And of course, it's also a Qigong practice, because if you learn Qigong, you start doing Qigong in the dream. And then when you start doing Qigong, you're trying to maintain your dream state. And once you maintain the dream state, that's challenging. It's challenging, but then once you can maintain that dream state, then you can start to explore that area of your mind. But that's one simple way. You can also, every time you look at a clock in real life, you can say, what time is it? Is this a dream? Can I fly? And you look at, every time you see a clock in your life, you say, what time is it? Is this a dream? Can I fly? And that can wake you right up into a lucid state.
It's such an interesting concept that our minds trick us into thinking something is real, and we have to consciously, repetitiously ask ourselves if it is, and then one of these times we're going to look around and we will be in a dream, but it's indistinguishable from real life. It's a fascinating element. People don't explore dreams enough. It's pretty strange.
Yeah, and it's something you have to have a dedicated. I know there are certain substances like melatonin, which are supplements that can help your dream state. The first melatonin I took, I hated. I didn't like it. It made my dreams weird.
Huh.
It'll help you sleep, as well.
Crazy, man. I mean, it's about that time that we wrap up, but to bring this back to the beginning of the show, I mean, one thing you mentioned about that chamber in Romania is that some people are debating whether it exists in this reality or another. And I had heard that some claims that an experiment at Montauk caused our reality to split, and we've been living within a manufactured reality since then, which gets into the same thing as some leading scientists talk about with the holographic universe and simulation theory. It also relates to the control matrix. But what are your thoughts on that? What is reality? Are we with an artificial construct? Did it come out of the Montauk Project, or, is all that just speculation?
Well, people like to put forth theories to either to try to figure stuff out or to try and impress, one or the other. And if you go back into Hindu mythology, the whole world is an illusion. They call it Maya.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all illusory. And even the Tibetans talk about the primordial essence of non-existence. Everything's based upon non-existence. This world we see is fallacious. Mm-hmm. So to say that Montauk is the creation of an artificial reality, well, certainly it was creating an artificial reality, a superimposed reality.
From within one.
But yes, we're all participants in a virtual reality. But the only reason reality is important is because we have to answer to it. We have to answer to it. If you don't eat, you're going to suffer. So we're hostage to reality because if we do not take responsibility for our interactions with it, we will experience suffering. So if we don't want to suffer, we have to pay homage to reality. And we don't have to pay homage to a god, but we have to pay homage to reality. And one of the most elusive or most challenging gods in Greek mythology was Kronos, or we call him Saturn. And Saturn he ate all his pupils because he's time. He represents Kronos, time. So, he eats the pupils. So when you get to time, you're going like, wow, time. We've got so much time. How much time do you have in a physical body? Now, one can go into the precept of reincarnation and say, wow, I'm going to reincarnate so I'll learn and all this. But now in this paradigm, all this literature that I've been writing and publishing is telling us by the phenomena or stories encountered that maybe we don't have to stop. We don't have to die in the same way we thought we would die. This is giving us hope and helping us have a new paradigm. So it's life extension, or the concept of life extension. The Qigong supplements that because, your organs are what basically cause old age. They fail. Well, if you're breathing with all of your lungs, which feed the organ, each lobe of the lung feeds an organ, you're not going to die if you're breathing. Most people aren't breathing. They're breathing like with 5-10% of their lung capacity. If they're doing a lot, they're doing 10%, and this just doesn't work. So you can elongate your life through practical means of breathing. You can also, but there's also these alchemical principles, which are the subject of Transylvania Sunrise, which suggest an even longer capacity to live. So
wow.
So the artificial reality all fits into that construct, but I'm saying is because somebody says this is a reality, that reality, it's much more complicated than just somebody saying it that. But yes, it's all tied to an artificial reality that we're creating that we have to answer to. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, of course. Well, man, it's kind of about that time. I really appreciate you coming on to talk about this stuff with me. I mean, we've been kind of all over the place. Montauk, the Romanian Hall of Records, Qigong, lucid dreams, but that's the way I like it. I like it to be a casual conversation. Some interesting stuff comes out that I didn't think I'd hear about.
That's great. So yeah, thank you for having me. The website again is skybooks.usa.com if anybody would like any of the books.
Of course, man.
Or
And
Amazon and many bookstores across the country.
yeah, and is there anything anything you want to elaborate on and that you're working on next that people should be getting ready for?
The next book is called, which will be out sometime next year, The White Bat, The Alchemy of Writing, which will have this story that propelled all of this happening, and then where it leads, which will discuss my adventures in Romania this year. And I will be also making a shorter report in the newsletter, Montauk Pulse, which is available through the website if anybody would like it. I also have a blog, which I'm not too active on the blog, but it does have a lot of interesting information on there. And I do try to answer questions on it. It's called digitalmontauk.com, digitalmontauk.com.
Excellent, man. Well, when that next book comes out, hopefully you'll come back and talk to us about it. It's fascinating stuff.
Certainly.